I'm Sue Elliott.
And I'm Ed Holen. Welcome again to this edition of the 2015 Olympia Insider.
And today we want to talk about the governor's budget that was just released last week and talk about some good things in it and also some things that will be a challenge for this coming session.
You know, it's interesting to me that every time we begin these podcasts each year and when we end them, we're always talking about money, as if money sets the policy for the state.
Well, I think anymore money does set the policy for the state, and this year is no different. We're facing, I believe, a $2.3 billion deficit. A lot of that has to do with the state Supreme Court's ruling on the fact that they don't believe our state is meeting its obligation for education, and then also some challenges that the mental health system has been having that are really going to impact our state.
And you recently talked to Andi Smith, the governor's policy advisor, about impacts in his budget for people with developmental disabilities.
I'm not sure how many folks follow the inside track of governor's budgeting, but we actually produced two budgets. Book one was constitutionally required and was created within existing revenues, which means that that budget had about a 10 to 15% cut across pretty much all state programs and was very bad for people with developmental disabilities and every other kind of social service part of DSHS. The Book 2 budget is dependent on new forms of revenue, because if we don't, we're cutting the heck out of social service programs. So in regard to developmental disabilities, there are I think some puts and takes that have people a little worried and a little excited. Made some investments in Lakeland Village for the Medicaid compliance issues. Two of the things that I think people are wary of are the cuts in the additions of Basic Plus waiver slots and IFS program. As you know, last year 6387 added 1,000 new Basic Plus waiver slots and 4,000 IFS slots when it changed to a Medicaid program. What the governor's budget does is cuts those additions in half. So instead of 1,000 waiver slots, you have 500. Instead of 4,000 IFS slots, you have 2,000. And the reason that we did that is because there are providers in the community who are really struggling. They came to talk to us to basically say that the rates that we're paying them are not sufficient to cover their expenses, and many of them are going out of business. And so the governor's concern was that we have an adequate supply of providers in the community to make sure that we could actually serve people on all the new waiver slots. And, you know, to an extent, anything having to do with IFS. So we did a less hearty gain in those waiver slots and IFS slots in order to give a 50% or 50%, I wish a 50%, a 50-cent increase to supported living providers. The other thing that folks will notice is that we took a cut to state-only employment and day. That was a really particularly hard cut because it serves about 400 people who have fallen off of Medicaid, typically because their income has gotten too high. The problem there is that oftentimes people get off of Medicaid because of the services and supports that Medicaid provides, right? So when you get off of Medicaid, you no longer have the services and supports, and sure enough, you maybe can't keep your job and you come back onto Medicaid. So one of the things that the Governor's Disability Employment Task Force is going to look at in the coming months is this whole notion of how do we support people to get off Medicaid, but then still give them the kind of supports that they need to stay off Medicaid and get, you know, gainfully employed. So that was a particularly hard cut, but the door is still open from our perspective in terms of solving for that.
Well, thank you, Andi.
Thank you.
To reiterate some of the things that Andi mentioned, you know, some good things in the budget. The governor identified that there needs to be a residential provider wage increase for direct care workers, which, you know, is very, very important for those workers. Also, some increases to personal care providers and some adult family home rates that need to be adjusted. And also, the governor has a pilot to help support people with behavior challenges in adult family homes.
One of the biggest letdowns in his proposed budget is the reduction of people now slated to receive services that are on what's called the no paid services caseload, or I think we can actually call it a waiting list, to reduce the number by 1/2. You know, it was said at a meeting that in terms of the reduction by 1/2, that it was better to get a half than to get nothing. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, yeah, unless you're in the 1/2 who gets nothing, how's that better?
Well, and in addition, they didn't put any money in for the high school transition students that will be graduating from our public school system, and that's really too bad. And then also they eliminated, again, they do this practically every year, the state-only employment funding that goes for people that are not on a Medicaid waiver.
Since we're not a program that's in the official forecasts that would include growth and be able to more effectively respond to these challenges, again, we have to come back and almost start from scratch at the ground level, asking you again to email, to call in, to write a letter, and best of all, come down to Olympia for an advocacy day on one of the Wednesdays during this upcoming legislative session.
Your story is so powerful, and it truly, truly makes a difference.
And we end this time like we do every time. Change is made by those who show up.